And an amazing week at Connect. My name's Jen Kranenburg. I am an elementary math coach with the Lambton Kent District School Board. And this is the first year that I've been in the role of math coach. Prior to that, I taught everything from grade 2 to grade 6 and a little bit of resource in between there as well. And over the last couple of days, I have been so inspired by all of the educators and all of the innovative things that people are doing. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I can't wait to go back to my school board and actually put some of these ideas and new products into action. So I'm a little bit of a geek. I get really excited about education, but the reality is I was not always that positive about school. So this is me as a teenager. When I was 13 years old, I was extremely disengaged. I really struggled academically. I had a hard time fitting in, despite the look. By the time I was in grade 8, I actually found myself on a bus. I ran away to a town called Hope, BC, where I camped on the Fraser River for a week before I got hauled back to Ontario by the police. And things didn't really get much better from there. So by the time I was in grade 10, I had been couch surfing my way across Chatham, Kent, and had just gotten my first apartment in grade 10. And I was at school. I got called down to the principal's office, and I wasn't a problem child. I struggled, but I never actually caused any trouble. And I remember walking down to the office. The idea that I was going to be in any trouble was the furthest thing from my mind. I was actually really thinking perhaps he was going to reach out. I was on a very fixed income. I had $350 a month, and my rent and bills were $325. Getting to school every day was a real challenge for me. And I remember thinking, maybe I'm going to get a bus pass, right? That was my hope. And when I got to his office, what happened was very far from that. He explained that my image didn't fit what the school was looking for and the image they were trying to portray. And he suggested that I go home. He would give me the credits for the rest of my semester, and I could find a different school, perhaps in the public system, for the following semester. And that day I became one of the 17% of high school students in 1991 that dropped out. And I never returned until I was 28 years old. And at that point, so in that 14 years, I worked a variety of waitressing jobs and variety stores. I was married, we had 3 children, and at 28, things fell apart very suddenly, and I found myself a single mom with no education and very limited work experience. And I really wasn't sure what to do. I considered getting a job working at the mall. I had an interview, and it was actually my daughter's kindergarten teacher who said to me, "You can't do that. You have to do better for your kids. You have to break the cycle. You are meant to work with children." And it was that one person in education believing in me and saying, "You got this," that I really needed, and that was enough to give me the push. I went to the university, and they were like, "No, we're not doing this." So I went to the college, and they let me in with a conditional acceptance. I did a 2-year diploma in early childhood education, which I then applied towards my BA, and I was fortunate I got right into the Faculty of Education. And my driving force the whole time was really that I wanted to go into the system and try and make a difference for a student like me, and perhaps be that voice for somebody that said, "You got this, you can do it," and perhaps stop somebody from dropping out of school. And thank you. That's a hard story to share. Thank you. I feel very vulnerable. The reality, though, I got a job right out of school. I had 2 years of LTOs. I got a contract doing prep, and then the 4th year of teaching, I had my own classroom, a grade 2 classroom, and I was so excited. And by the end of the first year, I found I was really disengaged again, and I was bored. I didn't exactly know what to teach. As soon as I got into that classroom, I realized I actually had very little in-classroom experience. And so I started to look around and see, what are other people doing? And I went to the manuals, and I started to teach the lessons, and the kids in my room got the exact same lesson that the kids in that room had gotten for years, in the exact same way. And I wasn't offering anybody in that room anything unique. And I realized I had to do something. I just wasn't sure what that was going to be. So I started to really think about how I could leverage the technology that was in the building. I had never really used tech up until that point. We had a cart full of iPads that were collecting dust, and I started to dig into how I could use those with my students, and it really did revitalize my classroom practice, and we had a lot of fun. We were connecting with people on Twitter, and the kids were showing their thinking on Explain Everything, and it was really feeling good for me. And it was at the end of that year that I got transferred to a different school, and so the following September I started, and my new classroom was very different. So the Ministry of Education identifies that 19% of our elementary school students are living in low-income homes. At my new school, that was actually 40%. So 8 out of my 21 students statistically were living in poverty. I didn't need those stats to know that. You could see it every day when they walked in, from their worn clothes, their empty lunch pails. They had no internet at home or no access to even a computer, and even just with their life experiences. So one day I came in and I said to little Jada, "Oh, you're as tall as a stalk of corn right now." And she looked at me like, "What?" And I'm like, the corn right now. It's like this high right now. And all the kids were looking at me, and I said, "Okay, who here has been to a farm?" And I had 4 hands raised. We live in the heart of southwestern Ontario. My yard, my side yard and my backyard is a cornfield. And it blew my mind that these students in front of me didn't even have that in their frame of reference. They had no idea what I was talking about. And I recognized that I really needed to leverage technology to try and open up our classroom and provide more experiences to my students. And it wasn't just about developing the 21st century competencies that we know kids have in the computational thinking, but it was trying to connect them virtually to the outside world, to realize that there is more out there. And that was a struggle because my new classroom had 2 very old desktop computers and 1 teacher iPad. So again, I had to kind of reinvent my practice and figure out how am I going to do this with these students with such limited technology. And I decided that the way to do that would be through Twitter. So we got on the first week of school and we started to connect with other people in the community. The students would tweet out questions, people would tweet them back. If anybody here teaches grade 2 or 3, you know that that age group, I think all of them, they're very egocentric. So when they have an authentic audience that is responding to them real time, they love it. They were starting to become more engaged and they wanted to see what people had to say. So we also decided to participate in the Global Read Aloud project, an excellent project if anybody here has ever been involved in it. So we started off our year just covering topics related to the issue of poverty through some different texts, and then we dug into the book One for the Murphys. And in this book, there is a point where one of the characters is talking about her experiences with going through a Salvation Army bin with her mom at night so that she can get clothes. And that really generated a lot of conversation in my classroom. And by this point, they had really established a community of acceptance. All of the kids recognized a common need for help among themselves. And so they started to talk about their own experiences, either going to the food bank or the soup kitchen, the women's shelter, and they started to talk about what could they do to help. They wanted to make a difference. And I wasn't exactly sure what we were going to do, but the kids really wanted, they wanted to do something with the food bank, and they wanted to, have a bake sale or a car wash or have a food drive. And one of my kids made this statement one day, and it was exactly what I had already been thinking. How are we going to make a difference when we are the ones that need the help? How are we going to have a car wash when only 3 of our parents have cars? Who's going to run a bake sale? So we wanted to do something, but we didn't know if we could. And when this student made this statement, I think it was a defining moment in my career, because I remember all of these little people sitting in front of me, looking at me, and you could see the defeat in their face already. At 7 years old, these kids already felt like there was nothing they could do about their circumstance. And I knew that if I really wanted to make a difference, this was the type of thing that I needed to act on. We needed to do something. And I wasn't sure what we were going to do, but I took a deep breath. I stepped out of my comfort zone. And I have realized since that moment that every time I step out of my comfort zone and do something that's really uncomfortable, and you know what, talking about poverty with a group of students that experience poverty, that's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for the families. But it was really important because when we acknowledge the issues that exist in student lives and we empower them to make a difference, that learning is meaningful and it's lasting. So we decided to log on to the website for Outreach for Hunger, and we all moved over to our old carpet and got on the desktop computer, and I think it took probably about 20 minutes to load it up and get onto the website. And when we did, we started to look at what ways we could help. And the students recognized, you know what, we're not going to be able to deliver or pick up items, and we don't really want to clean. They were pretty honest about that. But they thought perhaps we could find out what the bulking meant. They wanted to stock shelves. And the public awareness really caught their eye because by this point they recognized they had a large following on Twitter of people that they were interacting with on a daily basis, and they thought perhaps we could use that as a method to share information about the Outreach for Hunger. And if they couldn't physically give items themselves, maybe they could persuade other people to do that. So we wrote an email to the executive director that day, Brenda LeClaire is her name, and we asked her if we could come in. They wanted to find out more about how the facility runs, and they wanted to find out how we could help. So the next week we marched down there, and it was a really amazing experience because we brought some of our parents along with us as volunteers, and all but one of the parents we brought are also clients. So they got to see how the facility ran from a different viewpoint. And I remember when she was talking about the intake process and how she asks questions every month, 60 days. You can only go to the food bank every 60 days. So every 60 days when you go through the same process. And a lot of our families felt like she was being judgmental when she would say, "Why do you need help this month?" They wondered why she was always asking the same questions. And what they found out that day is that if you're always answering the same way, she can do something to help you. So if your high rent cost is a factor, then perhaps she can hook you up with some low-income housing. Or if you can't find a job because you don't have experience, she will link you with an agency that provides volunteer opportunities so you can build your resume. So it was really enlightening for the families in that aspect. The magic for me happened around the work table in the kitchen. We went back frequently, and the students would engage in the bulking activity. And what that really meant is you get a large box of items and you put it into smaller groups so that when somebody comes to the food bank and they're picking out their items, they can just get like a Ziploc bag full of items. So, for example, if you had 60 tea bags and you needed to divide them equally into 10 groups, the math that happened was phenomenal. We went from skip counting to repeated addition to the beginning of multiplicative thinking around that workspace throughout that year. And I recognized in that moment that my classroom did not need to be the four walls in that building. Our classroom was wherever we went and we took our learning. So during that process, the students also documented a lot of information. They were doing research. They were determined that they were going to make public service announcements. They wanted to use Adobe Voice, and they needed to collect as much data and information as they could. By that point, I had managed to secure an additional 6 iPads for the classroom, so they brought those along and they videotaped and they took pictures and took notes. And when we got back to school, we decided to use Google Forms to find out what people in our community already knew about the food bank. They loved Google Forms almost as much as they loved QR codes. So we collaboratively wrote this survey, and there were some questions in there that I was like, I don't know if we need to ask that, but we followed student voice, and everything made it in. And when they were done, they went around our school and they surveyed people in the building, adults, students. They took the QR codes home so that their parents and neighbors could also answer it, and we tweeted them out. And within 48 hours, we had over 150 people respond to our survey. And so the students were able to use what they knew about interpreting data to make some decisions about what kind of information they should include in their videos. They didn't want to repeat what people already knew. At that point, they broke into small groups, and some of the students created videos trying to convince people to help, and other students made informational videos. And I quickly realized that these kiddos needed a lot of help in terms of oral communication, and they just weren't listening to me. So I decided to call in an expert. We had made some connections with local media on Twitter, and we reached out to a radio host, Greg Hetherington, and we asked if he would come in. And he spent half a day with the students, and he worked with them on how to develop your expression and pronunciation. And he looked at all of their storyboards and gave them feedback. And that was really cool for them to have this community figure that they had all heard on the radio in the building, invested in their learning, and caring about their success. The really cool thing, though, happened over the Christmas holidays when their videos were done. They had tweeted them out, and they were very deliberate about how we tweeted. We had stumbled upon our Twitter analytics, and they, interpreting the data again, they realized that we had the highest audience engagement on Wednesday mornings at 10 a.m., so that's when all the videos went out. And they caught the attention of Ontario food banks and Canada food banks, and that felt really great. But when they were played on air over Christmas break for 2 weeks, that was when the kids almost exploded with energy. And they realized all of a sudden that I'm not their audience. The Mark book is not their audience or their purpose. It's about your larger community. It's about making a difference. And they had captivated so many people in their community already. It just kept adding fuel to their fire. So we had also decided that we wanted to be able to measure the impact of our videos. We didn't want just to send them out and wonder if they had done anything. When we sent out our initial survey, we had a test group of 50 people, and we asked that same group of 50 people to answer. It was a duplicate survey we had made, so to answer that duplicate survey again. And the students in small groups analyzed the data to see had more people answered the questions correctly the second time around, and they found that they did. So we could determine that we had made an impact. And I thought perhaps this would be winding down and we would move on to something new. But there was a piece of information in here that was very alarming to them. And out of all of the people that answered, the 150-ish people, 98% of them said that they would be scared to use food bank services. And they found that really concerning because we also knew that a large enough percentage of these people that answered our survey access food bank services. So the idea that people were scared to go and ask for help really bothered them, and we started to talk about what the factors could be. We talked about things like stigma, but the kids kept falling back to the physical environment of the space. It's a large room, and there's just chairs around the outside and bare walls. And they thought that perhaps that environment made people feel uncomfortable. So they came up with a plan. And their plan was that they would have a children's area. They were going to fundraise, and they were going to have a table and some chairs and some toys and coloring books, and it would be a great place to go. And they, their vision had already come to life in their mind. They were making all kinds of plans. They emailed Brenda, and were so excited to make this happen. And she emailed back and said, we actually can't do that. And she had a number of reasons why, including health concerns and germ contamination and things getting broken. And they were disappointed, but it was okay because our kids need to be disappointed sometimes, and they need to recognize that things don't always go the way that we plan, and you need to have another plan and persevere and develop some resiliency. So they went back to the drawing board, and our drawing board was usually Padlet, and started to talk again about what could we do. So here's the waiting room before. And most of the students landed on the idea of creating artwork. So they thought that was something that they could do to actually change that environment. And Brenda jumped on board right away. I'm not very artistic, and the kids know that. So I had some concerns about what we would do, and they suggested we reach out on social media and see if anybody would help us. And so a local art studio came in. Again, we brought the experts in, and they donated their time, 2 afternoons with the kids, and the resources, and they worked with them so that each student could create a beautiful piece on campus. And the great thing that happened for me through this wasn't just the art, it was the relationships that the kids were building with their community. And they were starting to really develop an understanding that if they needed help, there are people out there that are willing to come in and support them. And I think that that's really important, because when we look at factors that contribute to high school dropout rates, we know that students that have a positive role model, if not at home, in the community, are less likely to do that. And I recognized that this could have a lasting impact on some of my students. So we went out for our art installation. One of my little kiddos actually contacted the media, unknown to me. So when we got there, there was a reporter, and she wanted to learn about the work the kids were doing. And she interviewed them, and they ended up on the front page of the newspaper the next day. So that was really great, again, because their message just kept spreading, and they were really raising the awareness that they wanted to about the food bank and about the need for more. When we were coming home that day, back to school, I remember walking into school and talking to my principal, and we both thought, okay, so now it's really winding down, right? Like, what else are they going to come up with? But these kids never stopped. So we went into the classroom, and our Twitter feed was up, as it often was. And there was a tweet up that said something to the effect of, the rising cost of produce was resulting in less available fruits and vegetables in local food banks. So right away they were like, well, let's have a garden. And I said, let's not. And they said, no, let's do it. And I said, I don't know how to garden. I have one house plant, and it is not doing well. And they said, that's okay, somebody will help us. And sure enough, somebody helped us. So again, a lot of my kids had never been to a farm. We didn't have the money or the resources to get to a farm. So he brought it to us. We were exploring soils in our science unit, so the timing was fantastic. He came in, Joe brought some tarps, laid them out on the floor, brought in a bunch of dirt, and the kids had to mix in nutrients and some biofish and create rich soil. And that day we planted over 150 seeds for an indoor garden. And the kids learned a very valuable lesson about the importance of labeling your work, because the ones that didn't started to grow plants and they had no idea what it was. So they had to go back to their iPads and do some research and figure out what it was they were growing. And as the plants grew larger and they needed to, they were falling over, they had to figure out some way to support them. They started to use what they knew about structures and stability to create support for the plants. And one of my students said one day, we're not so different from plants. Everybody needs a little bit of help sometimes. The magic for me, the best moment of the year, was when we had our first harvest. And the kids were so excited. And I said, oh, you know what, that's great. Let's put it aside and we'll bring it down in a week or a couple days or whatever, right? Like, we were in the middle of 18 things. And they were adamant, we have to deliver this now. So we did. We got a little Ziploc bag, and we went down to the Outreach for Hunger, and we dropped it off. And we came back to school, and the kids felt so good about giving back, even though it was in such a small way. They had done something to help somebody in their community. And I'm going to try not to get choked up. I always do. The next morning, one of my students came running in, and he was so excited. It was like half an hour before the bell was going to ring, and he's jumping up and down, Miss Kay, Miss Kay. He lives with his grandma. And the day before, his grandma had gone to the Outreach for Hunger, and she had gotten some food items, and he fed his family that night. So for this little guy to recognize that he could be part of the cycle needing help, but he could also be part of the solution, was really empowering. And since then, several of the kids that I taught that year have gardens in their backyards, and they are learning how to grow food to sustain their own families to a degree. While this was happening, we had also developed a relationship with the reporter that came in. Everybody that met these kids fell in love with them, and they were so intrigued by all of her equipment. So Diana would come into the school. She came in about every 2 weeks, and she would teach the students a little bit about photography. And they really wanted to get their hands on cameras. So we put a call out on social media and asked people if they would donate their old digital cameras. And within a week, we had a class set of cameras, SD cards, and batteries. And that was really awesome because then Diana could tweet us once a week and she would give the kids challenges. So show me the rule of thirds in a picture, show me symmetry, show me a bird's eye view. And the kids started to develop these amazing portfolios of photography. And then we decided to use a twist on photo voice, and we gave each of the kids the camera and we said, take them home for a couple of weeks. And take whatever pictures you want that document your thoughts and your feelings around food insecurity. And the pieces they came back with were amazing. And they all wrote a little write-up about what it meant to them. And they decided that they wanted to use art to communicate with the public. And that they started as an art show, and then they thought maybe they could make some money. It turned into an art auction. And so we decided to go and host this at the Outreach for Hunger. It was in June, near the end of the school year. And at a school where we have a very low parent engagement, we had over 100 people come through. And we raised over $1,100 from the community by each student auctioning off one of their pieces. And that was money that they were able to invest in future projects. And we got a bus and we went to a farm. So that was pretty cool too. The following year, I moved up a grade, and some of the students came with me, and their passion for addressing the issue of food insecurity continued on. And so our indoor garden moved outside, and up in the top corner there, you can see we began our planning in February. We decided we would use square foot gardening, and each student was responsible for their own plant. So they created models to scale of what their plant would look like and how tall it would be. And we linked those to Erasmus, so when you scanned it, it would pop up pictures of their seeds, and then they added their seedlings and their plants. They added recipes, some videos, some of them blogged about their plants. So it became a very interactive piece, and when we were ready to move outside, we knew exactly where the plants had to go. But they weren't quite happy with that. Of course, they wanted to educate their public. So we had a community meal at the end of that year, and they invited a variety of people in. They charged $60 a plate, and they sold out almost right away. We worked with some local chefs, and the students were able to design some of the recipes, and they helped to prepare the food, they served the food, and they gave garden tours at the same time. So their understanding about how to produce food in their own life was very deep, and they really were experts. And the following year, they continued this work. So whether it was by being on the local radio station a couple of times talking about the issues in our community, or you can see in the corner creating cooking videos. So every week, 2 students would go up and they would pick a recipe, and they would, we had a whole production team, and they had a YouTube channel because they thought maybe people didn't know what to do with the food they had. So this was a resource that they were trying to develop for people. They blogged about their food, and every time we needed money, because we knew the school was in short supply, we looked to our community, and they became experts. Here they are sitting around the boardroom table asking the Women Leadership Council through the United Way for $1,000 to support one of their projects. And they were successful. They really became excellent at marketing themselves and their projects. And I introduced a project to them, and I actually didn't anticipate it going in the direction it did. But the task was, I wanted them to identify either a local or a provincial social or environmental issue, talk about the ways the government had already addressed it, talk about the ways that community groups had addressed it, and then create an action plan. We weren't going to act on it. It was just, what would you do if you had unlimited resources? And this poster came up again, and this was in the art auction. So a student that was in grade 3 at the time and now in grade 5 pulled up a picture of it and said, this is still a really big problem for us. And they wanted to explore why it was they had to walk so far to get food in their neighborhoods. And this is a real issue, not just because they go to bed hungry, which is enough, don't get me wrong. But for some of our families, they were involved with social services because of potential neglect. And the neglect was there wasn't enough food in the fridge. And so the kids were wondering, like, who's responsible for that, and is there a way we can help? So we decided to dig in a little bit deeper, and a couple of students were researching, and they came across the term of a food desert. And if you've never heard of a food desert, it's basically a low-income neighborhood where you have to walk further than 1.5 kilometers to access local, affordable food. And the kids started to think that perhaps they lived in a food desert. And we had just finished up some work on measurement, so they had an idea about how far 1 kilometer really is, and they wanted to find out some more information about this. So they hopped onto Google My Maps. They actually started this at recess, and they started to plot their homes. So when you look up here, you can see anybody that's in a red home is a student that lives in a house where there is nobody in the house that has a car, nobody in their social network has a car. So when they're going to the grocery store, they might take a cab, but that's cutting into their budget. They might take a bus if the timing is right, and that still cuts into your budget when you have a large family. Or they were walking, and a lot of them were walking. The yellow homes are homes where students either have a car or somebody in their support network does, so getting to the grocery store and back isn't really an issue. The green markers are the stores that they considered to be expensive, and they did some price comparing through the Flip app to make that determination. The orange dot in the center there is the outreach for hunger. The brown dot kind of near the bottom of the yellow ones, that's where our school lies. And the blue dots are the ones that are considered affordable grocery stores. So that's our Walmart out there, No Frills, Food Basics. The grocery stores of choice if proximity was not an issue. And honestly, the grocery stores that they often ended up walking to. And when they did this, and they used the measurement tool, they found that for the students in the red homes, they were walking between 5 and 6 kilometers to get their groceries. That really wasn't surprising to them. They knew that. This was something that they had experienced. They had lived this. But their issue with this is that they had just done all this work learning about the role and responsibility of government and communities, and they knew that this was a defined issue, being in a food desert, and they didn't understand why nothing was being done to help them. They really felt like this was something that they had to do something about. So this small group project really turned into a collective action, and they decided to channel their anger into making some change in their community. And I had no idea what this would look like. It was another one of those moments of uncomfortableness where you go, oh boy, where's this gonna go? But they had some ideas. And one of my students actually had something called a little free library out front of his house. And he pitched the idea of building a little free pantry. There were none in Canada that he knew of at that point. I had never heard of it, so I didn't know. But we went online and did some research. And what it is essentially is a box, a wooden box that sits in a low-income neighborhood, has a door on it. Anybody can open it and put food in it. Anybody can open it and take food out. So it's a give what you can, take what you need system. And I had a lot of doubts, I'm not going to lie. I thought it would be destroyed. I thought somebody would take advantage of it. I didn't know how we would get the money. I knew I couldn't build it. And I wasn't sure where we would put it. And I shared some of those concerns with them. And they are little problem solvers. So the next week, DJ showed up to school and he said, Miss Kay, we have a meeting. We have a meeting next week, 7 o'clock at night with Eastside Pride. Eastside Pride's a community organization that looks at providing support within the neighborhood. And he said they have money and they might give it to us. So the kids had already started a Google slide deck. Kids that don't like writing did an amazing job at putting together a report about what it is, how it would work, and why we needed it. And when we showed up that following week, not only did the students come armed with information and passion about this, but they brought an army of students from other classrooms and even other schools within the neighboring area to support them. And of course, they walked away with a check. So again, we reached out to the community and a local construction company offered to come in and help us out. And so on a Saturday morning, almost all of the kids came to school and participated in the build. And I don't know if I'm ever going to get fired for this because I'm not sure you're allowed to let kids use power tools, but I think it's always better to beg for forgiveness and ask for permission. So anyways, the kids participated, and prior to doing this, we had actually gotten a bunch of cardboard and they made models to scale of what they thought the pantry should look like. So we had some different ideas. They created a material list based on those models. And then I asked them, when we determined the exact size, to find the surface area so that we would know how much paint we needed. And some great learning happened when they asked me to buy the little can of paint, and they got halfway through and didn't have enough. So they had to go back to their math and revise and figure out how much paint do we really need, and we can't cut corners here. So it was so great for the kids, not even just in terms of the math that surrounded this project, but also to be involved in creating something for their community. All the while, we were working on a location. They knew that they wanted it to be in the midst of their food desert. We also knew it needed to be somewhere that was well lit, somewhere that had enough traffic on the road, and we wanted it to be somewhere hopefully close to a community organization, so someone we could partner with to keep an eye on it. And we kept running into roadblocks, and they learned a very valuable lesson through this process about how hard it is to actually create physical change in a community. It's really hard to bring ideas into real life, but they persevered. We talked to insurance companies, we talked to board members, and they kept revising their plan and coming up with alternate ideas. And finally, in June, we got approval. And it was not until the last week of school that we were able to actually go and get this thing in the ground. And at a time in the school year where kids are usually disengaged and wrapping up and they've checked out, these guys were, they were still full of energy, and they were finding ways to fundraise, to get items, to put into the food pantry when we opened it. And they decided that we needed to advertise this so people knew what it was. And so we usually use Twitter, but they recognized that perhaps we were trying to reach a different audience, and so we should go to Facebook. And we started a Little Free Pantry Chatham Kent Facebook group, and myself and one of the parents who is a social worker actually run this together, so we have access to the inbox and the kids can still decide what items should be on the page. And we put out a invitation for a ribbon cutting ceremony. And it literally was the second last day of school, and the idea was the kids were going to go have lunch, go outside and play, and then we would head down there. And we had a fist fight in the schoolyard, so it took a little bit longer to get out than we planned. We had to make sure our tempers had settled and everybody was good, and we were literally running at this point because we were behind, trying to get to the pantry. And one of the kids said, "What are we in such a hurry for? Nobody's going to be there." And when they turned the corner and there were like 25 or 30 people standing out front, the media was there, different organizations had shown up, everybody had food items. It literally brought tears to their eyes. They were so moved by the fact that so many people supported what they thought to be a very important, relevant issue in their lives. I was really happy that we started the Facebook group. I had some reservations at first, but it turned out to be an excellent way to track whether or not we had had an impact. So we had a lot of positive messages that were put on the wall, and a lot of people talked about how easy it was to help the community. So you go grocery shopping with your kids, you give them an extra 10 or 15 bucks, they go get some items, you stop by on the way home, you open the door, you put it in. It's easy. And that felt really good. But it was the messages in the inbox that nobody else could see that told me that these kids had actually done something very meaningful in their community. And having the social worker as part of this was excellent because she was able to connect a lot of people in our community with different agencies. So Hope Haven, which is a men's shelter, the Women's Center, Loads of Love, which provides furniture to people. And the kids continued this work. So I'm not at the school this year in my role, but they have continued on. This little girl on the side here, her mom owns a business making cookies, and every time they sell a cookie, they take a percentage of it and they use that to purchase items for the pantry. They've recognized that food drives in the school maybe aren't always the best, but they can use social media and people drop off items and they collect them and then deliver them. So the work really has continued for the students in this way. And I've asked the kids, what did you learn this year? When I asked that question, I thought maybe we would be hearing about science or, some cool tech stuff that we have done. And all the kids talked about the project and talked about the feeling and understanding that there is a community of people out there that are ready to help them, and understanding that they can create change in their community as well. And I know for a fact that we wouldn't have been able to do this in this way without the use of that technology. The connections that we made, the relationships that students built, the skills that they developed between making presentations and creating apps to show what they knew about the plants they grew and using Erasma. There were so many things that were embedded into this project and into the students having the lasting impact that they had. And it was really, it was great for me because I went into this profession because I wanted to do something to make a difference. And I really feel that I've been able to do that. And I would like to suggest that if a small group of motivated students that live in less than ideal circumstances can create this kind of a change in a community, then all of us can as well. Thank you.